Every expecting mother wants to have the most optimal pregnancy, but that's not going to happen unless the right nutrients are available. And today we're going to take a look at a key nutrient for optimal pregnancies that's often overlooked. Hey guys, I'm Dr. Arland Hill and welcome back out to Harvest Hills Ranch. And many nutrients are talked about when it comes to pregnancy. We're very familiar with hearing about things like certainly folate and folic acid being more the synthetic form there, but folate, iron, these kinds of fatty acids, DHA, these are all common nutrients that are focused on when it comes to having a healthy pregnancy. But there are other nutrients that are equally critical, and today we're going to take a look at one of those, which is taurine. Now, taurine is an amino acid, meaning that it comes from proteins. I'm going to speak more about what protein sources you should be thinking about as it relates to getting adequate amounts of taurine in your diet and some ways to accomplish that. But let's talk about what taurine does and why taurine is so important in this bigger conversation of optimizing both fetal development and with helping bonding between the mother and the infant. These are all key roles that taurine can support with. Taurine is going to have a very important hand when it comes to neurological health. And in fact, in this video, that's going to be where I'm going to focus a lot of our attention at. But I wanted to help you understand what taurine is doing and some of the roles that it has as it relates to the nervous system. Now, when we talk about the nervous system and we're trying to optimize the acuity of a fetus and then ultimately as an infant, there's going to be some specific things that we're going to focus on here with the nervous system. But before we get there, let's talk about how this all happens. So let's say that we have a nerve. And obviously we have multiple of these nerves. They don't just exist in isolation. But these nerves, again, of which there are countless numbers of, these have to communicate with each other. So first of all, when it comes to developing more of these neurons, taurine is going to be essential in promoting the formation of the neuron. But it's not just about forming these neurons. These neurons also have to communicate with each other. And they do that through their extensions. These are called axons. But that axon ultimately has to have communication with the next neuron. And this area right here, where all this takes place at, that is called a synapse. And these synapses are driven by taurine in part. Taurine is very essential in supporting the formation of these various synapses. Now, what are some of the implications when we start to talk about lack of adequate formation of the nervous system? Well, the first thing we need to ask is what area of the body does the nervous system impact? Well, quite frankly, it's everywhere, right? And so when we start looking at an inability to optimize formation of the nervous system, we can start thinking about just in general that there's going to be reduced growth. There's going to be inadequate neurological signaling to various parts of the body. In addition to that, we start to think about areas where our nervous system becomes very tangible. So for example, if we think about visual acuity or our hearing or for example, even touch, these can all be disrupted. And one that jumps to the top of the list when we're talking about taurine and trying to optimize development in the womb, but then also development outside of the womb as an infant, visual acuity is the one that can be set back by deficiencies or inadequacies in taurine. But in general, the overall central nervous system, when we think about the brain, the cerebellum, the cortex, and then getting down into the spinal cord, this whole central nervous system, adequate development of the central nervous system is driven by taurine. Now, you may appreciate when we start to talk about neurological health too, that there's a balance that has to happen here. So there's quite simply two stages. There's what we call the inhibitory and the excitatory. And there's a place where we need more excitatory activity and there's a time and a place where we need more inhibitory activity. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these two should be able to balance each other. Now, one of the things that taurine does is it works with the inhibitory side to be able to promote adequate stimulation. For example, we have a compound, a key neurochemical in the body called GABA, spelled G-A-B-A, and GABA is considered our primary neuroinhibitory compound. When we are in too much of an excitatory state, which is extremely common when we start talking about stress, GABA is the primary chemical that can help offset that and bring the nervous system back under control. One of the roles that taurine has is in acting and facilitating the activity of GABA when it gets to its destination of where it's supposed to be to elicit a response. There's another amino acid in this conversation called glycine, and it has its own receptors, and it can also work to calm the nervous system down as well. And taurine is going to be supportive of the glycine receptors just like it is for the GABA receptors. So when it comes to neurological health, of all the nutrients that you hear about, maybe with the exception of DHA, taurine is by far going to be at the top of the list. It is a key nutrient when it comes to optimal development of nervous system function, and it works hand in hand with nutrients like DHA as a fatty acid, as well as a couple of other nutrients in there too. But this is one that we definitely don't want to overlook. But are these the only roles that taurine has when it comes to development of the fetus and actually being able to support normal health and growth? And the answer to that is, quite frankly, no. And the reason that answer is so easily no is that when you look at the integrity of the cells in the body, these cell membranes, every cell has a membrane around it. The stability of that membrane, which is a very critical key concept, because the more stable that membrane is, the more competent that cell is. When that cell starts to replicate, that replication process is more efficient. So this taurine helps maintain and stabilize that cell membrane. One of the ways in which it does that is just simply through its antioxidant function. Now, if you think about this, this is a bit different than what we hear about many times when the conversation around antioxidants arises, meaning that often we're talking about things like vitamin A, vitamin C, zinc, these types of nutrients, or maybe you get into some of the plant antioxidants, but we don't generally talk about a protein acting as an antioxidant. But yet some of the biggest, most powerful antioxidants in the body are protein derived, the example being glutathione. Now, just like glutathione has a lot of sulfur in it, and part of what helps it bind up toxins and excrete those out, taurine is also has a sulfur molecule in it too, so it has the ability to help bind and modulate the toxicity of various toxins and dampen that through that sulfur compound, and ultimately helps support some of the sulfur pathways in the body. Now, in addition to some of these things that we've looked at here with taurine, we need to talk about what are some of the factors that limit adequate availability of taurine. Clearly, we've made a case here for the value that taurine has. It is extremely important in a number of different mechanisms here. And when we look at factors that limit taurine availability, one of the things that jumps to the top of the list is metabolic syndrome, and more importantly, obesity. And this is why when we start to think about supporting a female and helping her through pregnancy, really that conversation should have began way before conception. It should have began early on of trying to optimize the health and move the body into a better state, so that when we do start to look at how these nutrients are utilized, what their availability is, those nutrients are much more prolific in the body, and it's easier for the body to assimilate and use those and send them down the right pathways to ultimately not just benefit the fetus, but also to benefit the mother as well. So there has to be that duality there. Now, metabolic syndrome, obesity can be a limiter in adequate availability of taurine. When we start talking about things like preeclampsia, where blood pressure changes are taking place, that can be a factor here. Certainly malnutrition would just be a logical deduction on that. But we need to speak a bit more about that, and this is where we can get into some of the sources on taurine, in that malnutrition may not mean simply just not getting enough food in, not getting enough calories in. It may specifically mean the type of calories that you're getting in. So where does taurine arise from? Well, taurine comes from protein sources, animal-based foods in the diet. That's where the most significant content is going to be found in the diet. And even more specifically, if we look at red meats. For example, things like beef, venison, bison, lamb, goat. These are all going to be ruminant animals, and those animals are going to have a higher concentration of taurine and ultimately going to yield a greater availability of taurine. Now, in comparison to some other amino acids that are coming in through the diet, taurine is not going to be delivered at the same quantity as some other amino acids are. Therefore, we have to make sure that there's a consistent availability of red meats, but then also other animal-based foods as well to optimize that intake of taurine. Now, when we start looking at some of the differences here of what kind of levels are we talking about, well, in reality, when we look at some of the medical literature on this, 120 milligrams of taurine per day can optimize the availability for both mother and for developing fetus and for infant, which goes on to further state that this is not just a conversation that is related to pregnancy. This is also a conversation that should be thought about and when we're starting to talk about lactation as well. So there's an extended time frame here that we need to think about this. What about if you don't have adequate availability of these in your diet? Can you supplement these? Well, of course you can. You can easily supplement taurine into your diet. However, keep in mind that along with these various factors, quite simply one of which is stress that can deplete taurine, there are other nutrients in the animal-based sources that I mentioned that are going to be extremely critical when it comes to this time period in life. So not only are you getting taurine, but you're also getting these other nutrients as well. So I wanted to share this. I felt like this was a nutrient that is very, very commonly overlooked. In fact, I was trying before I shot this video to think about, have I ever had a conversation around pregnancy where I was just having an exchange with another professional and we were talking about taurine as a valuable nutrient in the life cycle and in pregnancy and in lactation? And the answer is no. I couldn't think of an example where I had that conversation. I thought, oh wow, that's even more reason for me to share this information with you, given what the literature says on this and how important this particular nutrient is. If you're looking for more information about this, or you just want to figure out how do you optimize your health, how do you not go down this road of running into some of these deficiencies and these different states of malnutrition and figuring out what's best for you, go to drarlandhill.com. You can find more information there about how I support patients. If you're looking for information to find out, well, where do you get the food sources? Where do you get these animal-based sources that he's talking about? Go to harvesthillsranch.com, and there you'll find how Leah and I raise food with uncompromising principles and how we support patients with this very food and make these same recommendations to them to help drive their health up that I'm sharing with you right now. Make sure you come back soon, guys, and check out more information here at drarlandhill.com. Thanks.